Politics, where politics always rocks.
Raimo. Every day, your personal data gets swept up by location trackers, email and social media apps, and the devices and third-party software that you use at school, work, or home. And right now, there are too few legal limits protecting you from how your data gets used. Your highly sensitive personal data is up for grabs. The government has way too much access to it, and corporations are making billions of dollars mining it. That's why people around the country are standing up for hashtag Take Control of Their Data, a new initiative movement started by the ACLU, a bipartisan coalition of legislatures in 16 states and the District of Columbia, simultaneously announced legislation to boost privacy protections for students and employees to stop warrantless invasions of your emails and text messages and safeguard you against location trafficking. The ACLU has been our nation's guardian of liberty, working in courts, legislatures, and communities to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties that the Constitution and the laws of the United States guarantee everyone in this country, whether it's achieving full equality for everyone, establishing new privacy protections for our digital age of widespread government surveillance, ending mass incarceration, or preserving the right to vote, or the right to have an abortion. The ACLU takes up the toughest civil liberty cases and issues to defend all people from government abuse and overreach. Joining me today is Chad Marlow. He's the Advocacy and Policy Counsel at the ACLU, where his focus is primarily on privacy and technology. Very much looking forward to this conversation today. Thanks so much for taking the time out to join us today, Chad. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
So we have a big topic to cover in kind of a short period of time. So I want to make sure these questions really count and we can get some good quality information to our listeners. Now, most people who have access to this kind of subject of mass government surveillance and data mining, you know, they think in terms of the NSA and Edward Snowden and some of the big headlines that have hit the news over the last few years. They get a little bit paranoid or they get so overwhelmed that they kind of shut down. Where do we start when it comes to really understanding the facts of what we're dealing with when it comes to super surveillance and over data mining? What do you suggest?
Yeah, it's a good question, and unfortunately, I think the place to start is by the problem. You have to understand the full scope of it. Certainly, what the NSA and other federal agencies are doing in terms of mass surveillance of the American public is a major concern. And in and of itself, if that was all there was, we would have a major problem on our hands. Unfortunately, the problem goes much deeper than that. A lot of the surveillance that Americans encounter unknowingly on a daily basis is not necessarily coming from the NSA, but it's coming from state and local law enforcement agencies. And so, when you walk down the street with your cell phone or drive down the street in your car, your location may be being tracked by local law enforcement, and you wouldn't even know it. In all likelihood, that is not being tracked by the NSA, but it is being tracked by local law enforcement. When you send your kids off to school and you think that's a safe place for them to be, you may not realize that the school is uploading enormous volumes of confidential information about your kids, and the school and corporations in the ed tech sector are mining that data to figure out everything they can about your kids, from how they can advertise to your kids to perhaps, noting that they got 2 or 3 detentions this year. And so if they apply for a home loan or a student loan in several years, they may get a higher interest rate because they're greater risk. Obviously, when we go on social media and we choose to share information with a limited number of friends, that information is mined by corporations to learn everything they can about us in order to monetize information about us and the way that we live our lives. So unfortunately, these incursions into our privacy are very, very broad-based. And so I think that when we first think about how we are going to address them, we have to think about the scope of them and then realize that there is no magic bullet on privacy, that there is no single law or measure that can be taken that will solve all of these problems, because we have actors on the federal, state, and local government levels, as well as private actors who are engaging in these incursions. And so really it's going to be, unfortunately, a broad-based, steady, incremental process as we continue to push back. If there is a silver lining in there, it's that Americans are pushing back, they're increasingly pushing back, and we're starting to have victories to show for it.
Wow, is all I can say. Now, when you say local law enforcement is tracking you, how exactly are they doing it? Do they disclose it? Do we know?
Do they disclose it? Sometimes, and it takes groups like the ACLU and others to force them to disclose it. But there's lots of ways in which you're being tracked by local law enforcement. And again, it varies on where you live, but not as much as you might think. For example, you live in a major metropolitan area, you might think there might be some fairly active monitoring of local law enforcement for public safety purposes. But same thing goes for small towns in Connecticut, for example, and so it's really pretty pervasive. So I'll give you some examples. As I alluded to before, if you drive your car down a street in many cities and towns, there is a likelihood that a technology called an automatic license plate reader is going to look at your license plate, digitize it, and track where you've been. They may search your car, sometimes for a legitimate purpose, incidentally. If your car is stolen or the subject of an Amber Alert, they're going to know about that, and that's good. But in other cases, they're just going to make note of where you were at that moment and keep that on file so that over the course of time, they may know what religious institutions you visit, what doctors you go to, what political meetings you go to. Do you go to an AA meeting? These sort of private subjects about you. So that happens. If you're walking around with your cell phone, there's devices called stingrays, or more generally, cell site simulators, which work like the child game of Marco Polo. They pretend to be a cell phone tower, and they yell out Marco, and your phone has no choice but to reply with Polo. And in saying Polo, they reveal where you are and other data that is captured on your phone. If you're using Facebook or other social media, a lot of police departments and local law enforcement monitor what you do on social media to make conclusions about what things you're interested in and what activities you're engaged in. And so there's a lot of work going on, and those are just a couple of examples. I also alluded to, if you send your kid to school, there's a lot of people, even law enforcement, that are going to monitor what your kid's doing in school to see if they can draw some conclusions about what threats your kids may present to the community. So it's happening in a lot of ways, and it's happening in so many ways that it's almost pervasive in our lives in the year 2016.
How did we get so far gone in this? I mean, this obviously, these kinds of systems did not pop up overnight. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the history of all of this kind of super technology got put into place so that it enabled it to be the way it is today?
Sure. I mean, I think it happened in two ways that are not completely connected, but are somewhat connected. The first is, I think after 9/11, there was obviously a dramatic and understandable on some emotional levels, a strong push to do anything we could, to protect ourselves. And so the idea at that moment was any sacrifice of privacy in the name of safety was justified. And with that, there was a turn to technology to find, every conceivable way that we could learn, anything about, the quote-unquote bad guys. Unfortunately, when you don't know who the bad guys are, you have to get information on everybody. And so that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what the NSA did. They decided to get information on everybody, and in so doing, kind of treat everyone like a potential criminal, a potential terrorist. And so that's what they did. And so that's where that came from on the government side. On the private business side, something totally different. The internet is exploding. It's becoming, an incredible source of providing information to people. But there's the question of how do we monetize the internet? On the one hand, you have your basic commerce features where you're looking, let's sell you a sweater, let's sell you a CD, and you make money off that. But a lot of smart people realized quickly that the real potential of the internet was not in what I sold you, but in the information I could learn about you. And the more of that I could gather, the more that I could compile and sell to others who are looking to sell you a product, or to motivate the way you vote, or to encourage where you might go on a vacation, or to encourage you to watch a TV show or listen to a radio show. And so the private corporations had a completely different motive, which is how do we take this amazing thing, the internet, and related technologies like cloud computing services, where you can store information away from your actual hard drive on your computer, and how can we maximize our profit off of this? And where these things potentially meet in the middle is that those companies who have the ability to develop advanced surveillance technologies can turn around and sell them to an eager government market who has the financial ability to pay billions of dollars to obtain them. And so I think that those three roads that somewhat converge but somewhat don't have all led us to this moment in time, where I think people are kind of finally waking up, looking at the landscape and saying, in the words of the old Talking Heads song, "How did I get here?" And not really being comfortable with where
back in July of 2015 about a mass surveillance infrastructure made out of light bulbs. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, there's in some respects, we're in an era where no surveillance can be too pervasive or too stealthy, and it came to light, if you'll forgive the pun, that one way to create a larger ready network of surveillance cameras in cities, airports, stores you may go to would be by having this kind of dual pitch. Municipality or airport or company, you could save a lot of money on your lighting bill if you switched from incandescent light bulbs to LED light bulbs. To which most of them said, that makes a lot of sense. And they said, but let me tell you about our LED bulb. Our LED bulb not only is a light bulb, but we have the ability to put a surveillance camera and audio microphones inside the bulb, so that in this place that heretofore has just been a light socket can now be converted over into a light socket as well as a full surveillance video and audio camera for your use. And so the concept and the pitch has been pushing, and I've seen this in a lot of locations. One such that has been kind of publicly revealed is Newark Liberty Airport, but other cities are considering using them. Is just a conversion over to these light bulbs. You look up and you see them, and you think light bulb. There's no reason to think, looking at these things, that these are in fact surveillance devices. And if you think about what does an airport look like? What does a city look like? Imagine the street lights in your city have been converted all into LED surveillance cameras. And as I talk about these things, I like to think I have enough of a foot still grounded in the real world to know that sometimes talking about these things, it sounds like, let's pass out the tinfoil hats. But the sad fact is these things exist. They actually exist. The license plate readers, the stingrays, the things called dirt boxes, which are stingrays that go in airplanes, shot spotter, these things that sense gunshots, and these things, LED surveillance light bulbs, they exist now. It's not science fiction, it's science fact. And this is one of the things that companies like GE are trying to roll out and push because they sense there's a market for them. And I think that there is, again, unless the public starts drawing lines in the sand and say, you know what, this is too much of an incursion on our daily lives to be acceptable to us as the population. So that's the situation with these incredibly stealthy, tricky, and as they are advertised, cost-effective in terms of a lighting bill, LED light bulbs that may, if we don't push back, be coming to a city or an airport or a store near you soon.
Now, are these something that could be put into people's homes, technically? Is this kind of something that people could buy unknowingly and install into their homes? Or is this strictly, right as of now, something that's used in like utility situations, you know, like street lamps or in mall lighting or public places?
You know, my best guess, and they tend to be a little secretive on that technology, is theoretically, it could be put into someone's home, because I believe these light bulbs, they don't communicate through kind of a direct plug-in wire feature. They would communicate through air technology like Wi-Fi. And so again, theoretically, since they do that, one could be stealthily put into someone's home, communicate by Wi-Fi to something outside your home, and you'd never be the smarter for it. Certainly.
Well, people really wouldn't know. So people wouldn't really know. Okay, so before I start freaking all my listeners out and they start getting really upset, which they should, by the way, they should be upset about this subject. Let's talk a little bit about the movement, what's happening, and the awareness that the ACLU is trying to bring to the public and give them a voice and back them up with protecting their rights of privacy. Talk to us about the Take Control Project, how people can get involved, and why it matters.
Sure. Well, the first stage of the Take Control effort, and again, it's the hashtag is Take Control as it's written on your keyboard. So CTRL is the hashtag. There's really kind of three underlying concepts behind it. The first is that what is privacy about? Privacy on some level is about, the protections we're entitled to under the Fourth Amendment, and I get that. But on the other hand, really what privacy is about is it's about you and I being able to make decisions about what information we want to share and with whom. And all of us may have different places where we go to on that. I have a certain standard that I have for my personal privacy. Kim Kardashian has another standard. They're very, very different, but we all have lines. And what Take Control is about in the first instance is that individuals should be empowered to draw those lines. In effect, right now, the government and even more so corporations want to view your privacy the way that you use it like an automobile, where they say you are entitled to step on the accelerator, the sharing accelerator, as much as you want, but you're not allowed to tap the brake. And really what privacy is about is allowing everyone the power to hit the accelerator, the sharing accelerator as much as they want, but also to tap the brake as much as they want. And so that's the first aspect of the Take Control campaign. The second is that there is a working theory that is largely accurate in this country right now, that Democrats and Republicans, progressives and conservatives, and I even mean ultra-liberals and Tea Party people, that we cannot work together on any issues, that we are so discordant in this country that we can't come together on anything. And while that is largely true, it is not true for issues of privacy. For issues of privacy, you see groups like the ACLU and the very conservative 10th Amendment Center marching arm in arm on these issues. And that privacy is one issue where we can find many points of agreement. And so to not act to protect Americans' privacy, given that it is one of the very few areas in which we have broad, bipartisan, basically nonpartisan consensus, would be even more of a shame. And fortunately, what we're seeing is that there's becoming a broader recognition of that, and that Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and progressives are, in fact, working far more broadly on privacy than before, and I think that's going to continue to increase. And the third element of it is that consistently Americans have looked to the federal government, to Congress, to protect their rights broadly, primarily and logically, because if Congress passes a bill, it affects every single American. But at the same time, Americans are getting very frustrated with congressional inaction, particularly on issues of great importance like privacy. And what Take Control is about is it's saying, you know what? If Congress is not willing to act to protect our privacy, then the states will. And granted, California or New York or Illinois or Arkansas or Alabama can't pass a law that affects everyone, they're not going to sit back as their city's privacy is compromised and do nothing because Congress isn't acting. The states are going to step up and they are going to take action to protect their citizens' rights. And if Congress wants to sit back and watch, so be it. They're not going to sit on their hands anymore. And what Take Control did is, in very broad areas ranging from student data privacy to location tracking to personal data privacy, 16 states and the District of Columbia all enacted legislation on the same day at the same time, again, bipartisan support and pointing at each other, saying, you know what, we're acting individually, but we're acting together to make a point that the United States is unified on this issue, even if our federal government isn't acting, and that we are going to take positive steps. And even already, we already have 3 states, West Virginia, Virginia, and Nebraska, who have passed take control privacy laws, and we have other states that are looking very good. So again, I think that the idea that Congress should act, but if they won't, the states and others will, I think is the third and perhaps in some ways the most powerful tenet of the take control effort.
Now, with the elections coming up in the fall and with all the attention focused on the campaigns, none of the candidates have really been discussing, if at all, this matter of privacy and data mining. How do you see the candidates as they are now, if you don't mind speaking for a few minutes on, this subject with them, because I don't think people really know how they individually feel about the data situation, about privacy. Nobody's talking about it. How does the ACLU see the establishment change that's coming up affecting the legislation and the laws around this topic?
Well, I think, in the first instance, it's not that these issues have not come up at all. Senator Paul on the Republican side, was kind of very active in talking about privacy issues. Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders engaged in a pretty decent discussion of it during one of the Democratic debates. But in some respects, privacy is a challenging issue for the presidential campaign, particularly now that we're coming to the general election, because Democrats and Republicans agree on it. And the presidential election is often, devolves into a discussion of points of disagreement. And I think that's unfortunate. I think it would be of a value to the nation if the presidential candidates were pushed on issues of privacy, both with respect to individuals and the government and individuals and corporations, because I think that they have a lot to say about it. But they're going to have to be prompted, because in our kind of 24-hour news cycle where something dramatic has to happen for them to cover it, but at the same time soundbite where it's something is a thoughtful point that doesn't necessarily scream of disagreement, it doesn't get a lot of coverage. So it's a little bit challenging. So while I would hope, given the importance of this issue and given the broad national agreement and movement on the issue, this would be something the presidential candidates talk about, they're probably not going to do so without being prompted, because it's not a place that they can draw a line in the sand, because, as I said, there's really broad agreement on these issues. But, moving from that agreement to actual tangible action is going to take conversation and moving this more to the forefront of the American consciousness.
It sounds like from what you've shared with us that most of our efforts should be focused on local government and trying to move campaigns of taking more privacy on that level than trying to address this from a federal level, because the federal level is so tied into the corporations that are making billions of dollars off of the data mining. So we appreciate that advice, and thank you for that. Is anything really private when it comes down to it? I mean, have people kind of just given up on the subject of privacy because they've become so conditioned to the fact that they're just always being watched?
I don't think so. I think it depends on how you talk about it. If you say to someone like, what do you feel about protecting your privacy? And you say it that way, people will say, listen, I don't have anything to hide. I'm not so concerned about privacy. But then if you put it this way, when you went on that you went on that beach vacation, right? You shared photos of yourself and your family on the beach, and you were in a bathing suit, right? You share that with your friends, yeah? How do you feel about your boss looking at those pictures? whoa, I don't want. Well, you know what? Maybe your employer is looking at your social media account. One of the bills we have protects employees' social media privacy. So when you bring it to that level, did you send that that cute wink wink message to your spouse the other day? Yeah, I did. Hey, what do you feel about the local police precinct looking at that picture? What? So I think the thing with privacy is it doesn't resonate when you discuss it on a theoretical level, but when you bring it down to specific examples where it's happening, I think people really do care about it, and they really do want to have laws drawn in the sand, and that's really where the work revolves. Although I would say one thing about federal action. I wouldn't write off at all action on the federal level, because congressional legislation is like a lottery ticket. Nowadays, you buy a lottery ticket and you don't expect to win, but if you win, boy, is it a big win. You're going to get rich. And that's kind of the way with federal privacy legislation. It's very, very hard to get it passed, but if you do get it passed, it's going to be a dramatic and huge win for the country. One bill that's been stalled in the Congress for a very, very long time involves the Electronic Communications Protection Act. And in short, that the law that currently exists is so old it goes back to the 80s. And based on a quirk on the way email worked in the 80s, you might be surprised, and your listeners might be surprised to learn, that any email that you have on a server like Gmail or Yahoo that is over 180 days old, the government doesn't need a warrant to read it, because it's considered abandoned by the standards of the 1980s. And so this outdated law actually has a majority of members of the Congress sponsoring it, but it hasn't moved for basically kind of political leadership reasons. But if we can get that bill to move, that could be a major change for hundreds of millions of Americans. So I certainly wouldn't give up on that. But I think the more important point is to say that we need to try to get our victories wherever we can. And so if that's the federal government, state government, local government, we need to be kind of hitting in any place we have opportunities for victories, because we have to take them where we can get them. So that's kind of the larger strategic point.
Okay, so people are listening. They're hearing what you're saying. They're enjoying what they're hearing for the most part. It's interesting and it's informative. They get off the show and they want to do something. What is something an average person can do to take action against something that sometimes seems or has the notion that it's just way too big to take on, or people become afraid of taking it on because they then become afraid of being targeted by, the same people who have access to this kind of technology to surveil you and, do all of this stuff. Where can people start? Where do we start when we take this on as a social matter?
Right. Well, not to sound self-serving, but one of the places you can start is you can go to ACLU.org, search for privacy or the Take Control hashtag, or even go to Twitter and search for the Take Control hashtag, and get yourself kind of tied in to the movement and the work that's being done. Right now when I look before me, there are some critical bills. Dealing with issues of privacy that are active in many states. If you have listeners in Hawaii or in Illinois or Connecticut or in New York, Minnesota, all of these states, and quite frankly, many, many more, have active privacy bills, which getting word out to your elected officials or writing a piece in your local newspaper is just the sort of thing that gives more attention to these bills, and it communicates to the people who can pass laws that the public actually cares about these issues. And it doesn't take, surprisingly, it doesn't take a whole lot of that to give these bills the momentum they need to pass. So that's what something people can do. They can become informed and engaged, at ACLU.org or in other places, and they can participate in the process. I certainly understand, the theoretical concern that if you write something, you're going to be more monitored. But the bad news, good news is you're already being monitored. So you don't have to worry about that so much unless you pop off and write something that's really threatening to somebody. Chances are it's not going to get much worse for you. So I think that it's like anything else. Become informed and get engaged. And lest you think. I can tell you a story right now. We had a bill that dealt with social media privacy issues in West Virginia, and the bill, although it had broad bipartisan support, it didn't seem certain that it was going to get a hearing in the committee that it was waiting before. And the ACLU engaged our activists and others, and ended up generating about 200 phone calls to the office of the committee chair, and that was enough to get the bill moving, and it is now a law in West Virginia. 200 people, that's not a whole lot. So really there is a lot of power in the individual action. And so again, if people can stay informed and they can become active with even a reasonably sized group of other people, you can get a lot done. You'd be surprised.
Yes, thank you so much. You can go to aclu.org and find out more information. You can also find Chad's blog posts, which are very eye-opening and fascinating. Hashtag Take Control, CTRL. Get to your social media networks and make a difference. You do count. Chad, thank you so much for joining us and for donating your time to speak to us about this important topic.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You are listening to Rocking Politics. You've been rocked. I'm your host.
You've just been rocked by Rockin' Politics.